Once you've ruled out the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be true.
And it is not a question of a little occultism or a touch of mysticism, Mr. Devlin. It is vampires. There's a host of damned souls at Highlands House.
I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night.
Here, the old gods aren't dead.
And what of the true god?
He's dead. Can't complain.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
You're listening to Paranormal UK Radio.
And good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Paranormal UK Radio Show, the flagship show here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Tonight, this is Mark Johnson. I'm serving as a host tonight. And joining me as co-host is our station manager, Steven Sakellarios. Steven, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good.
We wanted to mention, for those of our listeners who may not be aware of it, Irene Allen Block, our normal host. Unfortunately, she and her husband both have this COVID-19 virus. He brought it home, she caught it, and they've both been down for the count for the last couple of weeks. It's one of the reasons why we haven't had a new show out in a couple of weeks. And then, this situation, the way it's going all over the world right now, I know Europe and the UK, everything's shut down. People are being told to stay home. Same thing's happening over here in the US. Our president's talking about doing a possible quarantine of my tri-state area here. So not sure what's happening. I mean, I haven't really been out of the house much in the last couple of weeks, and I don't go anywhere, really, ordering groceries online and having them delivered, just so we're just not in contact with anybody. And thankfully, my wife and I work from home, so we can get away with it. But it's really bad out there, and it doesn't look like it's getting much better.
Yeah, I know Irene, when she first got it, she got on Facebook and she said, for any of you who think that it's not real, she says, this is no picnic. It's no fun. So...
Well, Elaine Thorpe, who I believe was one of our last guests that we interviewed, her daughter has caught this as well, and she's it's miserable because it gets into the lungs, and people, that's why they're talking over here, they're talking about the fact that they don't have enough ventilators for people who are going into the hospital. Irene was afraid she may had to go into the hospital. Thankfully, she was able to avoid that. But this is pretty bad. I mean, this is the worst thing I've ever seen in my lifetime. Now, I know from a historical perspective, we've had major outbreaks and plagues going back from the smallpox to the Spanish flu to the TB, all sorts of different maladies. So this is the first time for pretty much my generation.
What's really scary is to see some of these countries like Spain and Italy where the infrastructure is starting to break down. And so the question is just how bad can it get before the infrastructure starts to break down and the deliveries aren't happening and the police aren't there and
Well, and you know what? This is what gets me. Is I don't know what to believe anymore, because our news over here hypes up the fear factor to the nth degree, and they're making it sound like this is like the Captain Trips and Stephen King's The Stand, where 99% of the world is going to get wiped out, where most people are surviving this than are dying from it. I mean, there are still a lot of deaths, and so it's scary. I mean, do we stay in a quarantine lockdown like this? Is it overhyped? I honestly don't know. And
it's also bringing forth some interesting things that when they really need money to help people, they have it. They can't ever pretend that they don't have the money to help people.
Yeah, well, all they have to do is
they do have it.
Yeah,
they just print it.
They just print more money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go figure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's this is really interesting times. In fact, I just remembered now. I believe Elaine Thorpe was the last person we interviewed, and I don't know if you ever had a chance to listen to that show, Stephen. But that's where she's a trance channeler, and she channels her spirit guide Jonathan, who's this 1800s British gentleman, and This was 2 weeks ago, just as this was starting off, and he made some predictions that are coming true, and how bad this is going to be, and that a lot of people will die from it. But he also, this is a little new agey. I take it with a grain of salt, but saying that this is also the beginning of a mass awakening, and things are going to be quite different after all of this. From a spiritual perspective. So, okay, yeah, we'll see how that goes. All I know right now is I can't get toilet paper or paper towels.
Yeah, on the practical level. Yeah, I'm using when I went to the store, they were out, but there was some napkins, so I bought like 4 stacks of napkins, and I'm cutting them into squares.
You know what? I can't get. I was able to get some toilet paper and paper towels, but now I can't get napkins. And forget
I'll trade you.
Any kind of antiseptic or hand sanitizer or cleaners. I mean, everything is just wiped out, and I know they're trying to restock it, but just as soon as it comes in, they get wiped out again.
I managed to order a gallon of rubbing alcohol if it was from a vet supply.
Really?
And it actually arrived. Yeah, so I've got a gallon. I just use an alcohol spritzer, the heck with the hand sanitizer, because they say that the hand sanitizer is only as good as its alcohol content. So I said, the heck with this, I'll just get the alcohol.
Just go buy a bottle of vodka.
Yeah, well,
the cheap stuff too. I mean, you don't want to waste good vodka.
Yeah.
Oh, good Lord. So, we as the Chinese curse goes, may you live in interesting times, and we are certainly doing that. Everyone, it's funny, we're coming into April. The show is airing now April 1st, April Fool's Day. Yeah, the joke's on us. But, everyone was thinking, 2019 sucked, really can't wait for 2020. Well, you know what? 2020 is making 2019 look like, a birthday party.
Yeah.
So far. So I guess we're just going to have to see how all this plays out. But in any case, we're trying to get back on track and get some shows going here, and keep all of you people who are also trapped at home, give you something great to listen to. So without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce our guest. Tonight we're talking with Penny Griffiths-Morgan, and Penny is an author, researcher, and the host of her own upcoming radio show here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. So we welcome Penny Griffiths-Morgan to the program. How are you tonight, Penny?
Hi, I'm really good. I was interested listening to what you were saying about COVID-19, because obviously I'm in the UK and we are a few weeks ahead of you guys across the pond. So I was quite interested in listening to what you were saying about would quarantine work, with this, with that. I had a wry smile on my face on some of it, I must admit, because we are a few weeks, obviously Irene's over here as well. And we are a few weeks ahead. And what you were saying about using vodka, anyone listening who thinks that's a good idea, apparently vodka hasn't got high enough alcohol content.
You have to go with Everclear, folks.
Only in
Everclear moonshine.
Yeah. Well, there's an Irish drink that I think it's banned now because the vodka, the alcohol content's like 50-odd% called Poachine. That would possibly do it. But yeah, vodka, even cheap vodka, you don't want to go wasting it, because, some of us are stuck at home who are homeschooling our kids. We need all the vodka we can take in the evening when the kids, in fact, school finishes. So don't go wasting that vodka.
No.
Don't go wasting it, no.
Don't blame you there. Well, we may be a couple of weeks behind you, but from the figures that I've been seeing, we're rapidly catching up. We're on Italy levels right now.
You're surpassing it, I think. I mean, my husband and I do sit and watch the news on it every day, because the way I look at it, and you mentioned about me being a historian, this is what kids in 100 years are going to be studying. We study the Spanish plague from 1918 at the end of World War I as part of history, and this is is our generation's equivalent. So it's really interesting. And one of the things I've been trying to get my 10-year-old son to do for schoolwork is writing down diaries of what's it like being stuck at home, what's it like having to not being able to go to school, what's it like sort of seeing mum and dad sit and watch the news at 5 o'clock every day to see what the newest announcement is, because it's those kind of reports that are going to be what kids are studying in 100 years as part of the history of how this affected people. And as you say, no one in our, I say no one has seen anything like this who's still alive. I think they were interviewing someone on the television the other day. He's 100 and, we worked this out, he was 112, I think, 113. He's the oldest man in the world. And he does actually remember the Spanish flu in 1918. And he said it feels different. Even though more people, millions died in that, because obviously we didn't have antibiotics, we didn't have I can't even speak now, respirators and all that kind of thing. He said the feel was very, very different. There was a lot more panic to this than there is to that, because of how worldwide it is, because of the fact that, you know, it jumps from China to Italy. I mean, not even from China to a bordering country, China to Italy. And every country is treating it slightly differently. You've got places like Sweden, which are refusing to lock down, even though their cases are jumping up. It's definitely real. And to why you're saying about them painting such a bad picture of it when they're not talking about how many people are surviving, I can actually see why they're doing that. It's because so many people aren't taking it seriously. You know, you've got people in the UK. I had a row with one the other day. Actually, it's the husband of a friend. He still wanted to have his weekly poker night round his mate's house, and 10 of them were going to go around there to have poker night. And it's like, this guy's wife is pregnant. And it's like, this is real. And I think that's why they're having to paint it in such a bad light, that, you know, it is real. It can kill. And talking to people I know in the medical industry, in the US, in Canada, in the UK, they sort of say to me, you cannot believe what's happening unless you're going into one of the hospitals, and the amount of beds that are being requisitioned for ICU beds, intensive care beds. It's
they're setting up mobile hospitals over here. They're turning some of these big entertainment centers over here into, you know, hospital field units. And, you know, they have all this drive-through testing and whatnot. And it's just the difference, I think, speaking of what that gentleman was talking about from the Spanish influenza, is our instant media now. This is the difference. This is like before you would read about it, and if you were relatively isolated, you hear the news back in 1918, you know, I don't even know if they really had the radio much. I don't know if radio was really prevalent at that time. So you had newsprint and anything coming over the wires. And so it didn't affect people as badly, except, you know, whenever there was breakout in their communities. Yeah. Now you're hearing about everything happening all over the world instantaneously, and
now we're sitting there looking at the Italian coffins and the skating rink in Spain and that kind of thing.
I was going to say, there's a skating rink in Spain that's an actual mortuary now. I mean, it's logical. It's logical. That's what they turned into a mortuary. In London, we've got a massive entertainment sort of centre, like conference centre, entertainment centre called the ExCeL in East London. That's been turned into the Nightingale Hospital with, I think it's something like 4,000 beds. And they're going to be doing something similar in the north of the UK as well, with a similar establishment. I mean, that's terrifying. But the one thing I say to people is, it's kind of like we're at war, and these measures will have, even though no leader wants to enact them, these measures will be almost in like that locked box. Like, what do we do if? And it's the same with the money side of things. We'll be paying this off for the next 50 years plus, same as we would if they were raising money to go to war. So I just think, do your bit, stay at home, don't be a numpty and buy everything in sight like some people are doing. Don't risk people's lives. It's not going to last forever. Just and sit and listen to these sort of podcasts and stuff. I mean, they're there for you to listen to. Do it. Listen to them.
Well, I read something the other day that there was some knucklehead who threw a party at his house with about 50 people, calling it a Corona party. And then I don't know if you have that over there, but over here there's a very popular Mexican beer called Corona.
Oh, we love Corona over here.
Yeah.
In fact, my husband and I got married in Mexico and developed a love of Corona over there. And there's a photo that was doing the rounds. My mum got it, sent it, and it's a supermarket in the UK. All the other beers are gone, apart from this stack full of Corona.
Yeah.
And it was like they had to put it on special to sell it. And I was just like, I'd quite happily have it. I quite like Corona beer.
That's my favorite.
Exactly. It's just so nice, isn't it?
But
and,
that just shows you how
people are that stupid. They think that Corona beer is linked to the coronavirus.
And see, this is why I weep for humanity, because, sometimes I think if the asteroid hit us, it wouldn't be such a bad thing. Because
well, it's just like, why do you think nobody tells us the truth about aliens?
Oh, God.
Can you imagine? It's no wonder that we don't know really what's in Area 51 and whether Roswell was real and all that malarkey, because 90% of humanity wouldn't be able to handle it. They'd lose the plot.
Oh, you break the conditioning. You break the what I call societal conditioning. That's churned out everybody to think the same, be the same. I always. Not that we're going to get into that subject, because we want to talk about you and your books and everything, but I've always mentioned that one of my favorite movies was John Carpenter's They Live.
Right.
Which, if you ever saw that movie about, you put on the sunglasses and you can see that the real world, because it's all being run by aliens.
Oh, no, I've never seen that.
Oh,
no.
Great satire movie, action movie. It was a B movie from the late 80s. It was supposed to be making, a satire, making fun of just like the rich, kind of the differences between the rich and poor. But the movie's themes are more relevant now than when it was made back then. And you watch it and you see exactly what's happening with, between the rich getting richer, poor getting poorer, the disparity with the media influencing everything, commercialism, and all this subliminal messaging. Really, it's an ingenious movie and well ahead of its time. And, I kind of blame that type of society way we've been since after World War II, since things started changing. So, yep. But anyway, let's talk about haunted history.
Yes.
That is your specialty, and you are the author of 2 books.
So far, yep.
So far, I assume more of them are in the works.
Oh yes, number 3. I'm working on it during the lockdown, seeing as I get a chance to sit and really plough through it and write bits up. So yeah, number 3's being worked on right now. Yeah.
So let's talk about your first book, which is I don't have it here.
My Haunted History.
My Haunted History.
My Haunted History.
Yeah.
So what made you write that book? I mean, were you involved in the paranormal before that, or what made you interested in writing about haunted history? Okay,
well, I've kind of always had. I've always thought I can see things and hear things. I'm not a medium. I'm not a psychic. I'm nothing like that. But even as a young age, weird stuff used to happen to my sister and I, where we lived in the boonies in Norfolk, in the middle of nowhere, and quite frequently we'd see things walk past our living room door that was like a glass door. We'd see a figure go up, and then we'd hear creaking up the steps when there was nobody else who could have been. And one of the first experiences, I think I was about 9 or 10, and my sister was about 3 years younger than me, and we were walking our dog in the village, in a tiny little village. Everyone knew each other. At that time, it was really safe to walk, for us to go and walk the dog. And there was this old derelict barn in the village that we used to tease each other that an evil witch lived in, as you do as kids. And we'd dare each other to go up and look through the doors, as you do. And there was one time her and I both decided to look through the door, and there was this, it was really dark inside. It was a brilliant sunny day outside, really dark inside. And there was, the only way I can describe this thing, it was like Tinkerbell from Peter Pan. It was this bright, the glow, it was indescribable. And it was like it was flying around. Now, we don't really have insects in the UK that glow. We don't have those kind of things, especially that would be inside on a warm summer's day and no water and all that. And the weird thing was, it was the way it was flying around, it was kind of going round things like it was following, it wasn't like a dust, is what I'll say. It wasn't an orb. There was no natural light coming in to illuminate a piece of dust. And this thing just flew up to where we were looking in through the break in the door, hovered in front of us, and then just shot off. And I remember my sister and I sort of standing there just looking at each other with what have we just seen? It was it just took our breath away. And we never really talked about it because my parents weren't into that kind of thing. And time sort of went on, and I actually lost my sister when I was 22 and she was 19, and some very weird things happened to me just after that happened as well. But when I got to about 30, I thought, I've really got to grow up now. I've got to forget about this stuff. I've got to get a job. I need to get a mortgage, all that kind of thing. And it was actually, but I still had an interest in it. I still kept reading up on it, but I wasn't in it, if you like, the field as much as I am now. Fast forward, I'm doing a night feed with my youngest child, who's 6.5 now. And I was trying to find something to watch on the television at sort of 1 o'clock in the morning to amuse myself, because he took a long time to feed. And I found an episode of Ghost Asylum with the Tennessee Wraith Chasers. And it was like 3 or 4 episodes bang after the other. And I started watching it. And once I was able to actually understand what they were saying.
Yeah, those deep Southern accents.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I know them now. They're actually friends of mine now. So they do think this story, they love this story. And especially when I say it took me a little while to understand Chasey Ray. Even they said they used to struggle with him sometimes. I was absolutely engrossed, and I was like, wow, you've got all this stuff. You can go and do proper ghost hunts, and you've got all this equipment you can use, and this is so cool. And literally the next day I was telling my husband, and I said, can I see if I can find someone who'll train me up to do this? And he's like, go for it. And that's kind of how the actual, that side of it started. The history side, I mean, as kids, my parents used to drag me and my sister to museums. Wherever we went, we had to go and see a museum or a castle or something. And I was probably about 12 or 13 when I actually started to realise this was quite cool. And it was also then that I got a history teacher who absolutely embraced my interest in it, and the fact that he would let me sort of at lunchtime collar him to stop question him about something we'd been learning and look at different aspects of it and how it relates to modern day and all that kind of stuff. So that interest had always been there. But again, when you're in your late teens, 20s, it's not cool. And it wasn't until I got to about 30 and I thought, blow it. I actually enjoy this. I don't care whether people think it's cool or not. I am going to embrace this again. Unfortunately, my husband is a massive World War II history fan. Anything to do with that, he finds fascinating. And so consequently, I've got someone who is quite happy to sit and watch documentaries on history and listen to the stuff I do, which is always helpful. And then it was really when I started doing this sort of training up to be, if you like, an investigator and learn what the equipment was and how to do it. And I started sort of reading articles about places, and they'd talk about this ghost named such and such who did this there, and that this place was a mortuary, or this place was an orphanage or whatever. And I started thinking, that doesn't seem plausible to me. So I started using my history knowledge to research these places to find out exactly if that was true. Like, if somebody was supposed to have lived in a place, it's quite easy if it's after about 1800 to find out if they genuinely did live there. And I started using that. And that was really where Haunted Histories came about. I was actually doing an investigation at, it was an old US Air Force, World War II US Air Force control tower called Rougham, which is in East Anglia, the bumpy bit on the side of UK. And I hadn't really done any historical research beforehand, but I then did it afterwards. And some of the stuff that had happened, I was able to provide historical validation for. And it was doing that actually one of your other presenters, Richard Clements, who does the Paranormal Concept show.
Yes.
He was like, well, you come across quite well. How do you fancy doing this as a show? And so that's how the show started. And then I was about a year into the show, and quite a few people started saying to me, why don't you write down all your research and accounts? Because it's quite interesting. And I was a bit like, no, you don't want to read that. No, that would be boring. And I kept getting hassled. And then it was two other authors who I was friends with, Mike Cavell, who's up in Hull in the UK, and Richard Estep, who's he's an ex-Brit. He's a Brit, but he lives in Colorado. And they were both like, just start writing and see what happens. And that's kind of where my haunted history came from. But it's more, I did it so I look at 10 places that I have done. I wouldn't say full-blown investigations at, because they're more of sort of just scratching the surface. But it looks at the history of these places and some of the stuff I discovered, and then whether there's any correlation between the two. And that's where my haunted history, the book, came from, because I had so much research that I'd done for sort of at that point about 18 months worth of podcasts. And when you're doing weekly podcasts, I have scores of research saved on the computer, and somebody said, use it, put it into a book form. And that's what I did.
Excellent.
Impressed.
Well, I'm also a big history nut, and okay. I think it goes hand in hand with paranormal investigation, because so much of it, what you're doing, at least what the real researchers are doing, is that historical research. You can go into a location and they can tell you all the stories. Oh yes, such and such from this date hung herself up in the attic, or lover didn't come back from war, so she flew herself off the balcony, and all these things that you find out just weren't true. Nope. You do the research, you find out the location, you find out, and then, because so many people just, urban legends are just so popular.
Yeah.
And
so Penny, as a whole, would you say that these things did check out or didn't, or what was the ratio?
That
may be too broad a question, but I'm just curious.
When I'm researching someone else's, like, I'll give you an example. Before, because originally Haunted Histories the show was on Parasearch Radio, and Parasearch obviously shut down earlier this year, but one of the last shows I did with Parasearch was on the Queen Mary, the ship that's in Los Angeles. And one of the supposed stories that was around there is that there's a little girl ghost seen, and a lot of people have seen her. I'm not disputing that she hasn't been seen, but supposedly the story goes that she decided to go swimming one night in the indoor pool without her mum and dad and drowned. Plausible story. That's why she haunts the place. But the resident sort of, he's actually an illusionist, but he also does a lot of the investigations there. My guest on the show, Aidan Sinclair, him and I were talking about that, and he said, we've categorically proven they've got death records. Anyone who died on the ship, it has to be recorded. And bear in mind, this ship only launched in the 1930s, so death records had to be pretty well kept. There's no record of a little girl dying on there. And it transpires it was a medium back in the late 90s who was a very sort of show person type.
Peter James, yes.
Was that who it was?
Yes.
Who came up with this story. And rather than people validating it, saying, well, yes, there is actually a record of a little girl, age 7, blah, 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 they just took it as fact. And Chinese whispers means rather than people questioning it, it becomes fact. I'm working on one at the moment, and it's a place in St Helens in the north of England called Mill Street Barracks, and it was an army barracks from, I can't remember now, about 1860 something. And one of the things that companies used to sell it for investigations, it was used as a TB hospital. And when I first started looking into that, I thought, why would an active military barracks, and it was active until the 1950s with soldiers, want to have a TB hospital in a relatively small building? TB is highly contagious. TB hospitals used to tend to be put out of towns and cities so that people could get the fresh air and everything. Plus, in the area of St Helens, there was a huge TB hospital on the outskirts that is still known as such. And so I started researching into that, and I cannot find hide nor hair of confirmation it was ever a TB hospital. I spoke to the regimental records keepers of the regiments that have been based there. They've got no record of it. They don't even know where that rumour started. And it's things like that that I kind of think, well, actually, truth is normally stranger than fiction. You don't need to make these things up to sell these places. And so I would say when I'm researching someone else's story, chances are 70% of them, I can't find any verifiable fact to go with the stories that are now coming out. When someone has newly investigated something and they give me some information, I'd say it's the other way around. I can normally find something that lends credence to what's been found. But I do have a bit of a mission. It just annoys me, all these things that I'm not disputing a medium or inexperience didn't happen. I'm disputing the story, the way they put the pieces together, and rather than saying we believe or this is leading to us to believe or it indicates, it's fact. And yeah. And that's where I kind of get a bit like the eyes start to roll. And as my husband says, the minute I hear something like that, he said, next thing I hear is clicking on the computer and you start trying to find out whether it's true or not.
Well, and sometimes you have to watch what's on the computer. I mean, I remember for years people would use the website Snopes to find out whether something was true or not. But, even Snopes has been fact checked and found out to be wrong a lot of the times. Wikipedia, forget it. Trying to look up something on Wikipedia.
Wikipedia is useful. I mean, when I start researching a new show, I must admit, Wikipedia is quite useful because it gives you lots of different facts. And as long as you don't take them as gospel, and I've heard people do shows, I swear I've heard this, literally they've read out Wikipedia when they've been talking about something, and I can tell that's what they're doing. But you use it as a starting point. I like to use what they call source material. So I am looking at census records. Yep. I am looking at newspaper articles from the time. I am looking at, say, for a TB hospital, I would go to what would have been the health records of that time to find out at National Archives level to find out if a hospital had been commissioned by the government. I am looking at government parliamentary debates. I am looking at, official stuff that's firsthand. It's not been interpreted or whatever. It is the source material. And I mean, sometimes even then you can question it because like with census records, sometimes they wrote the dates of birth in wrong or they misspelled a surname or something. But you can normally then double check it against something else to see if that's what's happened. But no, I don't just look at things like Wikipedia. I tend to use a lot of different sources. I mean, on average, to research a show, when I do a podcast, you're probably looking at about 8 to 10 hours worth of research on the history side per show.
Wow.
To give you an idea of how in depth, because for example, I'm the first show that I'm going to be doing next Monday, isn't it? It's going to go. Is it Monday? Is it Monday it goes out? It is, isn't it? Next Monday.
Yeah.
Because I'm recording it at the weekend. Is on Lemp Mansion in St. Louis.
Yes.
And I started researching. I've probably spent about 3 hours researching that so far, but I tend to go outside of the obvious. Like, so we know that certain members of the Lemp family killed themselves. We know they were brewers and everything. And then I thought, well, hang on. Anheuser-Busch is the most famous brewery in St. Louis. Where do they sit in relation to the Lemp brewery? And why did all these Germans suddenly appear in Lemp? In St. Louis? What caused them to appear? So I tend to look outside a subject as well as just the subject. And if I'm reading up on something and I have a question like, well, why is that then? I will then try and find the answer out to that, which is why I probably spend hours researching, because I also want to triple check my facts. If I've got a fact that I think is pretty out there, I'm going to triple check it. 3 completely different sources, because I want to know that what I am saying is solid, and hopefully that's one of the things I'm known for. And I know that people who've listened to my previous shows, who've read my books, who read my blogs, they tend to say if I say something, they tend to trust it because they know that I haven't just copied it off the internet and written it down. I have, I'm pretty sort of checking things.
I know a couple of who I call armchair researchers who just people submit them stories and they turn around or they go out and look up something on the internet and then turn around and regurgitate it as their own. One guy in particular, I'm not going to name his name. He knows who he is. He's written several books, and all it is taking other people's stories and regurgitating it into a book form and putting it out there and trying to make money off of it.
And then once it's in print, it becomes fact. This is the thing that drives me crazy. Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I will do that. I will take someone's story and I will put it into an article or the book, or I'll mention it. But I'll always say that that is their story. Mm-hmm. I'll always normally say, I haven't validated any of this information. This is their story because it's one you probably heard. So there's nothing wrong with referring to things, but as you say, you don't make it out to be your own. Whenever I write, you can tell it's my experience that if I'm writing about rather than what somebody has told me. Because I have no problem. I mean, the book I'm writing at the moment, I will be getting other people's accounts of things that have happened in this place, but you will know it's their account. You'll know it's not mine. Shall we say, borrowing other people's work without crediting them for it is a big bugbear of mine.
Yep.
And it's also, if you're going to take someone's a story. Like I say, this TB hospital situation in St Helens, if I ever wrote about it, I would be citing every single source so that if people want to look it up for themselves, they can, because that's the other thing I want to do. I want to teach people how to do it for themselves. It's not that it's hard, but it's not hard, if that makes sense. It's time consuming. And sometimes you do have to start to learn the tricks of how to do it. But anyone can do it. Anyone who's got a computer and can search for stuff can do it. It's just the way you think.
And, it also helps to be able to interview people who are in the know, whether, especially if it's something local. I was going to make a point, but Steven, I know I cut you off. What were you going to say?
Well, I was, I was going to ask her to give us an example of one that really did check out by way of contrast.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this is actually a personal experience, Stephen, so I hope that's okay. Yeah. It's actually in this chapter is in my haunted history, and this is probably one of my favourite things that has ever happened to me, and it still kind of sends a shiver up my spine when I read it. There was in Chelmsford in Essex, there's a place called Highlands House. And it's a beautiful building. It's not quite a stately home, but it's a little bit more than a country house, if that makes sense. But during World War II, it was actually the headquarters of what became the SAS, which not everyone knows. And I was lucky enough to do an actual investigation there a few years ago.
And for the benefit of those like myself who don't know, what is the SAS?
Kind of our supreme elite fighting people. Probably okay. People equate them to like your Navy SEALs, but even the Navy SEALs, if they're feeling humble, would probably admit the SAS is one step above them. Okay. When somebody says the SAS are going in, you kind of go, okay, it's either really, really bad or that's a really good thing. They are the elite of the elite. I think it stands for Special Air Service, but the SAS are the supreme soldiers. I'm not denigrating other soldiers because they all do an amazing job, but the SAS is kind of the elite of the elite. And they were actually only formed during World War II. And they actually did, say, Highlands House in Chelmsford in Essex was their base. And there's a bit of a standing joke with some people with me, is in that I actually seem to attract soldiers whenever I go somewhere that's got a military link. They seem to, whether it's because of my military history knowledge or what, I'm really not sure. But anyway, so I'm in Highlands, and it's a public investigation. So I was making notes of little things that happened because it was quite interesting. But I'm not that sort of. You can't always get what you want because there's going to be a lot of contamination and everything else. When you've got members of the public who've never done one before, they don't always know to stay quiet when you're trying to do an EVP burst session and all that kind of thing. But I was in this room. I think it was what they call the library at the hall. And we had, if I remember rightly, it was a portal going. And so we were sort of, loads of us are asking questions. And I think I said something. And all of a sudden through the portal, you know, that thing sounds like it sounds like somebody's trying to talk satanic to you, doesn't it, when it first starts talking? All of a sudden, you heard the words Penny, Corporal, Penny, Corporal, Penny, Corporal, over and over again. And I thought I was imagining it. And a couple of other people said, it's saying Penny, Corporal, Penny, Corporal. And we were like, okay, that's a bit weird. And I said, okay, if you stop saying that, I will come back later with one or two people and we'll try and talk to you. And it stopped straight away. So later on, I was working with another lady she's actually a history teacher by trade, and she's very into World War II military and World War I for that matter. And we were standing by this picture of the guy who was the commander of the SAS, a guy called Paddy Mayne, and we had novelists with us. And I laughingly said to the obvious, "Go on, give us a word that will freak us out." And the first word it came up with was boxing. Paddy Mayne was a champion boxer. That was a bit weird. And then it said Venus. And we were both looking at it going, you've lost the plot box. You know, why would it say Venus? And suddenly she goes, look over there. And about 10 feet away was a statue of Venus by us. Now, that was weird enough, but we decided to go back into this library. And so I start sort of saying, you know, Corporal, if you want to talk to me now, can you talk to me? And 3 words came up on the ovilus. I kid you not. Corporal, Terry, not. Those are the 3 words that came up. I wrote them down thinking it was just the thing just happened to be throwing words out at us. And then we sort of said, where did you fight in World War I? And the answer came back, World War II, sorry, and the answer came back as yes. And then we said something like, what was it? Things like, did you die in Europe? And it came back as North. Is in North Europe. And there was a few other things. And I wrote them all down, didn't think much of it. And then the next day I was starting to look up details. And I thought, let's see if there was a Terry Knott, who was a corporal, who died in World War II. And I found a Corporal John Terence Knott, who died in, I think it was 1944 off the top of my head, in a battle in Northern Europe, where he is buried in Northern Europe. And it was a battle that we know the SAS took part in. He was also... There's nothing in his military records, just that he was a Marine commando. Now, what's really uncanny is that even now, SAS soldiers, not the officers, but the soldiers, they just put them down as rank and number. They don't give you any records of what they've done. A lot of them are Marine commandos. That's how they get into it. It certainly was during World War II. Most of the people that were recruited into the S were Marine commandos. And there is nothing on his record, his military record. All it has is the battle he was in and that he died and that he was a Marine commando. It would lead me to believe, maybe, there's a strong chance, that's who was communicating with us. To find someone called John Terence Knott, and Knott was spelled Knott, which is how it's spelled on the ovilus.
Well, what is that?
Strange.
What is that technology you're using? Explain that, because I'm not familiar with it.
The ovilus, yeah. It's meant to be. It's a word generator. So I'm not sure off the top of my head how many words it has. It's something like 10,000 or something like that it has stored in its data bank. And a spirit is meant to be able to, and again, nobody knows for sure, because nobody knows anything of this for sure, really, do they? The spirit is meant to manipulate it to answer your questions. It can be a bit hit or miss, and I do find a lot of people will try and whatever answer comes up on it, they will try and make that answer fit what they want it to fit, as opposed to just take it and go, what does this mean? I have had some quite interesting results with them. I've also had some where I'm looking at it going, that's just random words. But to say to him, hi Corporal, it's Penny, I'm back again, and for the words Corporal Terry Knott to come up on it, and actual answers that I've then have all fitted into this person, this Corporal Knott, that is still one that sends shivers.
It's pretty interesting. Yeah.
So I have had things like that I know there's an awful lot of people that would try and debunk it, but and you know, there's no proof that he was SAS. He could have been just a Marine commando and not done a lot, but it is a 50-50. It's possible he was part of early SAS under this Paddy Mayne. But it was just one of those, I can't, I try and debunk stuff as much as possible. I'm even though I believe it's possible, I'm also incredibly skeptical. And, you know, if someone says, oh, it's an orb, I will go through every single possible sort of why it might not be. There's still a chance it could be. There's a small chance it could be, but I will still try and look at all the the other options first. Same as if someone hears a knocking that they can't explain. Well, I'm going to go off and see if that is just pipes knocking, if it's this, if it's that, if it's, rather than automatically assume it's paranormal, because I then find if I've gone through all these different things that I've tried to do to disprove that it's paranormal, when I can't find an answer, to me, it gives it more validity, because rather than accepting everything unequivocally is paranormal, you start to learn how to question it. And then, to me, that makes the experiences you do have that you can't find a logical explanation for, it makes them more special, because you genuinely have no clue what it could be.
Well, I'm going to share something with you, because I have two experiences that I can share where doing the research helped in an investigation, both positively and negatively. I mean, where I live here in northern New Jersey, there's this road that's not far from me that's been made infamous by, there's a local very popular magazine called Weird New Jersey. And they talk about this road, Clinton Road, and it supposedly has all of this urban legend surrounding it. Everything, you know, from ghosts to cryptid creatures to, you know, ghost cars that chase people off the road to a kid drowning falling off a bridge. And if you take a quarter and throw it off the bridge, it gets thrown back at you. And they even talk about like Satanists in the woods, or KKK, you know, people. It's all this stuff. And for years, you know, people go up to this road and looking for experiences. Some claim they have experiences. So I went and I researched it, and actually wound up being part of a television program that contacted us about scary roads. But during the research, we interviewed a lot of residents, people who lived on the roads. We looked up the histories and found out, you know, almost every single story was bunk. It's all urban legend. None of it was true. And in fact, what made me laugh was this talk of people seeing like Satanists, you know, people wearing white robes walking through the woods and whatever. Turned out that back in the 60s and 70s, there used to be a nudist colony up there off that road. And they had to park down below and walk up. Well, they couldn't walk up, you know, naked. So they wore their white bathrobes to go up. Well, somehow somebody took that to be like, oh, Satanists out in the woods, you know, going in,
even worse,
or KKK, and it's like, yeah, I mean, it's just, it's funny. But of course, in that program, that documentary that I did, for every tale that I told, then I refuted it. And of course, guess what got cut out of the episode? Everything I refuted.
Oh yeah, so, I've had that happen. I have had that happen, that people have completely, I know a few researchers who've done that. There's another one that I'm friends with called Jamie Rubio, and she does a lot of things like that. And she's given research to programs to sort of show the truth of what happened in a place, and all of a sudden they don't use it and they stick with, like you say, the urban myth because it's more interesting. And it's that kind of thing that makes investigators like us look like idiots, because, you know, the amount of times I'll say to someone, this is what I do, and they will say, well, you lot believe in stuff, you never investigate it, you never look into whether it's plausible or not, you never. And they say, well, actually we do, but that doesn't make it onto television because people don't want to hear that.
Nope. They want to hear the scary stories.
Yeah. Now,
another one where I started off with something completely. We did a whole show on this, and this is right up Steven's alley, since Steven has, you know, written books and has studied. He's a big study on reincarnation, and I did a past life regression once, a self hypnosis tape, where I after several failed attempts and nothing happening, I suddenly at one point saw myself as a young woman back in the mid 1800s. Mm-hmm. And in this, where I saw myself in this parlor in this house, everything's very Victorian. I could look at myself in the mirror and see what I looked like. I knew I was in Boston. And then the name Marion Howe came to mind. Okay. Never heard of that before. So I started doing some research. And after a lot of digging, found out who she was. And the family itself was relatively famous, but I had heard of her mother, who was Julia Ward Howe, who was famous for writing a Civil War what an abolitionist song, the Battle Hymn of the Republic.
Right.
And, well, this person that I was, Marion Howe, actually her name was Florence Marion Howe. And not Marianne, but Marion, M-A-R-I-O-N. And I found pictures, found a history, even found out where she's buried here in New Jersey. And she was a writer. Her parents ran a school for the blind in Boston, lived in Boston. So all this information that we were able to find just on me doing this research on somebody I had literally never heard of.
Yeah. Yep.
So
I think the thing is though, I've never heard of her or her mother or anything else. The fact that you've done this research and you've now you're keeping her story alive, and that's what when I do some of the blogs that I write, I try and write about people or events that most people haven't heard of, to bring them back to life. I wrote a blog recently about a female World War II pilot called Diana Bonato Walker. And I've had messages from people going, I've never heard of her. Well, now you have. It's that kind of thing. And that's one of the things that I love so much about doing the history research is you find these stories that have just been forgotten about because maybe they weren't that important at the time, or everyone who knew about them has gone, or it's not the classic sort of D-Day landings or Battle of the Somme or Battle of Britain, all those Pearl Harbor, the big events that people sort of know about. Yet when you start digging into them and digging into the individuals, they've all got amazing stories to tell themselves, and that's one of the reasons I get quite excited when I find a story like that, because it brings that person back to life again. And so by doing that research, however that I suppose the opportunity to do that research comes to you, you've done it, you've embraced it with both hands by looking up this Marion, but it then starts to tell their story again, so somebody else knows their story and they're being heard. And I think that's quite important personally. I enjoy it.
As being a paranormal researcher for the last 20 years, I've researched everything from private homes to historical locations. And a lot of times the historical locations, I'll go to the docents, I'll talk with the historical society, go look through the records, find out what you can about the place, and that's always very interesting information. Of course, over here in the U.S. we don't have locations anywhere near as old as what you have over there in the U.K. and in Europe. Most everything we can investigate over here is between 100 to 200 years old. Still, the history itself is really intriguing. Now, what I find intriguing is going to a private residence. You're going to somebody's home where they're experiencing activity, and then trying to figure out, well, why? What happened here? And again, you'll hear stories that, supposedly somebody committed suicide in this house, or it's buried on an Indian burial ground. God knows that's real popular out here, Indian burial grounds. Hey, and let me tell you, there's only one property I've ever investigated
that we're pretty sure, because we brought in ground penetrating radar, is on top of an Indian burial ground. But
that's an interesting one. You talk to I know I've got quite a few Native American friends, and you talk to them, and they'll be like, "But we wouldn't haunt that. You know, that's our burial ground. We're not going to haunt it. That's not going to cause people's houses to do like an poltergeist and disappear into the ground and all that kind of thing." It's a bit like when people say our cemetery's haunted.
Yeah.
Chances are no, because you know it is one that. But again, that's one of the sort of the myths that you hear. But you know, having spoken to a few different sort of tribal type leaders and saying, "Is there any chance?" and they sort of roll their eyes and go, "No." You know, don't. It's not like that.
Well,
that's not really the place where the trauma was, unless they were trapped in a coffin or something. You know,
exactly. Or whether they, you know, it's more likely to be where people have been slain or abused or. Yeah, no, the private houses thing. I did actually do some research with someone recently. She just moved, and she said, "How do I find out the history of my house?" And I'm like, "Wow, okay, that's, you know, a bit of an open question there." And she said, "I don't think it was always a residential house, a family home." And so I just did a little bit of, found out that it was built between about 1931 and 1938, and found out a few other bits. And I said, "But by the way, the house opposite, that was a children's home for a very long time." And she goes, "That's what it is I'm picking up on." And it was because her house has always been a family home, but the house opposite was converted into an orphanage for a while. And I found the records confirming this. And that's what she had been picking up on. But it is interesting. And yeah, I mean, the only benefit you guys have, because your history, say this doesn't meant to sound patronizing, although it does a bit, in fact, your history isn't as old as ours. It's easier to find the records. Anything before about 1770, 1780, it's almost impossible to find documented evidence. Because whereas with your stuff, I never have problems when I'm researching for, say, an American or Canadian or even an Australian place to do a show on. I never have problem finding records because of the fact most of them is 1800s onwards, and things were documented quite well. When you're looking at, say, a castle here that was built in 1066, and they want to know who would have lived there in 1220, it's nigh impossible to find.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, again, with here, we've been able, you can look up the property records, and so much is online now, but, you know, there are several properties, especially here in New Jersey. Now, I'm originally from Los Angeles, and, you know, the history in Los Angeles goes back 50 years, maybe, or actually almost 100 years.
Better than 50.
But you know what? It's, you know, yeah, that type of history, you know, I didn't grow up with that kind of history until I moved out here in the East, being part of New England. And, you know, it's a much older, and there is a lot more history out here. So some of the houses I've investigated, I'd go to the public records office, and some records and deeds are online. Others you have to do old-fashioned digging through books. And what's funny is, going through the book of deeds, every time you find a deed on a property, it lists in the deed where the previous deed can be found, what book and page number. So you would go and keep pulling these books. And what I loved as a historian is every book you'd pull, you're getting older and older, and you get to the handwritten records. Everything is handwritten in script. And then the older the book, the older the record, the more flowery and elegant the script.
Yep.
And it's incredible. Now everything's like, you know, cursive typed out, you know, Times Roman numeral or whatever it is on a piece of paper, boring as hell. Going back and then reading this old script, and how back then some letters that we use now were used differently back then, like a lower
like S.
Yes, lowercase s was actually a lowercase f.
Yep.
So we used to. I found a reference to it once. I go, New Jersey. That's not the name of the state, but realize
it was the second S, right? They'd write an S, but then if there was two S's together, the next one would be like an F.
In the newspapers here, I was looking at one that was was doing it for something recently. I think it was 1780, 1790, and S's just were F. If it was a big a capital S, it was an S.
Yes.
But if it was a small s, it was an F. And it does make it quite confusing when you first start reading it until you get your eye in to what it's actually trying to say. But I know what you mean about finding the old paperwork. It is a standing joke between a lot of my friends that put me in our local records office and I'm gone for 9 hours. I don't come out because you go down this rabbit warren of research that you read one thing that refers, like you say, to another thing, and then you refer to another thing. And I think last time I was there, I was actually researching I was doing a World War II presentation to the 11-year-olds at my son's school as one of the sort of voluntary things I did. And I was looking up how the town of Chelmsford was hit quite badly during World War II, and most people don't realise it. And I found all the memos that were sent from the support centres, sort of saying, right, we need this ambulance in Chelmsford, we need people to provide tea and coffee, or tea probably, and all these memos. And I was reading one, and it was like 1:20 in the morning, and I know the raids that day started about 5 minutes before that, and reading these really flimsy memos that weren't ever really meant to be kept and weren't meant to be touched a lot, and the smell of them, and thinking when that was actually being written, the German aircraft were over the top, were bombing the place, as this poor operator is trying to write this message that she's just got through to coordinate sending aid out to, and things like that. I just, when you think that was, or you read something that was handwritten in like 1722, and you're literally holding this in your hands thinking this was written sort of 300 years ago. Somebody sat here and wrote this. And I am a bit of a geek. I do geek out at things like that. And I was due to be going to the National Archives in a couple of weeks in West London to do some sort of real diggy research for my next book. Obviously, that's been postponed. Mm-hmm. But I mean, even my husband said, "You ain't going to come home, are you? We're going to have to find you locked up in one of the rooms because you don't want to leave." And probably not, because again, it's source material. It's not just stuff I'm reading an account of on the internet. It's real. It's authentic. And yeah, I do. But it doesn't matter whether it was written in 1945 or 1745. To me, it's somebody did this. Somebody took the time to do this. And I guarantee when they did it, they didn't realise that 100, 200, 300, 400 years later, people like us would be getting all excited about this little irrelevant memo that they wrote.
Makes you think twice about what you write in Facebook, Well,
it does, doesn't it? It does. I mean, that's why I'm really trying hard at the moment to be just positive on Facebook, or sarcastic. I can't cope with not being sarcastic. It's kind of me. But not being nasty, not getting into fights, not getting, I just think people, you just don't know. You don't know what somebody's going to look at that in 100 years' time and think, well, they weren't very nice, were they? So yeah,
that might be all they have of you,
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Well, I'm hoping. I've written 2 books so far. I'm hoping, maybe in 100 years' time, somebody will go, "Who is this weird woman who was writing about history and ghosts?" I'm really hoping that's the case, but you never know. Never know.
Just make sure that you keep it in print and not electronic, because you know what? All this stuff that we're talking about on Facebook, whatever, all it's going to take is one good, massive coronal ejection from the sun, or something else, and some type of EMP to wipe out electricity for a while, and we'll lose.
Well, here's the thing: can you put stuff on DVDs? Would those survive that kind of burst?
Well, the DVDs would survive, but what are you going to play them with?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
My books are. I mean, they're on Amazon. They're self-published. So as long as Amazon's running, you can buy them. So if Amazon is still here in 100 years' time and still sending out paper books, you'll be able to buy them. But I think I say this is one of the things when people sort of think I'm nerding out about history. It's like, you do realise history is happening every day. We are setting the history for the future, and yeah, I do find it, as you can probably tell. I find it fascinating, but I also enjoy listening to other people talk about it, because I can't be an expert in everything. So I don't know much about the American Civil War, for example. I might know a bit more than some people would because I've talked about it before, but I don't know as much as someone who really studies it hard. I find it fascinating talking to them and learning about it and asking questions and I never. It's the beautiful thing about it, enjoying something like history is you can never know it all, ever. There's always more to learn. So even someone like me, I can't get bored.
Well, like you mentioned with the Civil War, where I live, and I'm right in the middle of. I'm a little north of where most of the Civil War was fought, but I'm right smack dab in the middle of not only the Revolutionary War, but the French and Indian War before that. Mm-hmm. And not far from me, in fact, a few weeks ago, my wife and I took the weekend. It was the weekend before all of this stuff hit. And we went up to Lake George to stay at this one place to get away for the weekend. And, there's the old forts up there, the British forts, Fort William Henry. Have you ever saw The Last of the Mohicans?
Yes.
With Daniel Day-Lewis with a fort that was under siege? That's the Fort William Henry.
Wow.
And it was all based on real locations and real events, but with a fictional story twisted in. But there it is. There's the history. There's the fort. You can walk right up and touch it. I live just 3 hours away from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And I've spent many times going down to Gettysburg and touring that and hearing all of the history and having quite a few paranormal experiences while I'm there too. Yeah, that's on my wish list. One day I would get down to visit Gettysburg and just absorb it. I mean, there's so many things to learn about. And I say I enjoy learning about a new subject. I do have certain subjects that I'm probably classed as an expert in by some people because they're ones I do know quite a lot about. But the beauty of doing a show like Haunted Histories is the subject matter I need to look into changes every time. So I'm always learning something new. Even though there does after doing it for 3 years now, there's crossover. I do sometimes do a show and think, I did something on that in the other one, and I can kind of pull out some of that research to sort of the I suppose the outer limits of what I'm researching for a specific show. But I think it's also about making history interesting. And so by saying, you just mentioned about that fort, that's the sort of thing I would bring in. I'd say, that film, Last of the Mohicans, the fort they had in there, that's actually real. That's this one. And when you if you've got, say, kids, if you can actually make it interesting for them, they will remember that as they get older. And so they'll develop an interest in it. And I did that with workhouses with my now 10-year-old, because whenever we go to visit my parents, we have to drive past an old workhouse. And so I started when he was about 6 or 7, I started spoon feeding him little bits of information about the workhouses in the Victorian times. And one of the things I said to him when I think he was 7, I said, you realise that you wouldn't have been allowed to stay with me if we were in that workhouse? What? No, 7-year-olds, they went off to their own bit. Your little brother would have been allowed to stay with me, but you wouldn't. And it's making it real for them and giving them information that sounds like it's coming from a boring, dusty textbook that makes them remember. Now, he remembers. He's 10 now, and he can still remember all the facts I've spoon-fed him every time we've gone past this workhouse. And that's what I try to do. If I can get somebody else to say, and that's why I kind of combine the history and the paranormal, because what I find is people who are into the paranormal sometimes, not all the time, think history is boring. They think history is boring and dusty, and you've got these sort of I hate to say it's normally old men who sort of drone on and on about dates and this happened and this, and if they can go away from listening to me and go, actually, that's quite interesting, I'm going to read up more on that particular battle of World War II, or I'm going to read up more on Florence Nightingale, or I'm going to read up more on actually what happened at Gettysburg, then that's my job done, because they realise it's not boring and fuddy-duddy and everything. It's actually quite interesting. And the same with people who are into history, who are like, paranormal investigators, you're all bonkers, you all think every single sort of knock on a wall is a spirit trying to communicate with you. But when they listen to sort of how we talk and how we try and
say, correlate information and everything else, and they start to go, actually, you're not all complete nutters, are you? You're actually quite sensible at the end of the day. And if I can sort of bring the two a bit more together and see that, as you said, I mean, you said there's a natural link between the two, and if I can get both groups to realise there is a natural link, that's a good thing in my eyes.
It seems to me that eventually, I don't know when it's going to come about, but there'll be a time when historians would never think of proceeding without the paranormal, without psychics, and
Oh, I hope so. There was one historian, I can't remember who it was a few years ago. She was interviewed about, do you believe in the paranormal? And she goes, I'd like to, because wouldn't that make my job easier? I don't have to go through things. I can just get a medium to talk to someone who lived in that era to tell me what it was really like. And it's right. It's correct. I mean, I use one of the things I get thrown at me about the history side is, if I go into a location and I already know the history, is that going to influence what I say I'm experiencing? I always make sure that if there's a psychic medium, they don't know, I don't tell them any of the history facts beforehand. I will only tell people who actually ask me some of the facts. I tend to keep my knowledge for afterwards when I'm potentially verifying or not things that have happened. But what I do use it for a lot is for triggers, like setting up trigger type experiments. So, for example, if I'm in a place that I know was an American World War II base, US Air Force base, and I've investigated a few of those in the UK, I'm going to get them to play things like Glenn Miller and things like that to try and, because music is an amazing trigger for activity. For example, if I know I'm in an American Air Force base, if I bring in an RAF cap, that's normally going to promote something because the US Air Force didn't like the RAF and vice versa. So that's going to generate some kind of ribbing. It's not normally, I've never had anything nasty, but it's normally been like, oh, I'll get that out of here sort of reaction. Same as if you go into, you're going to use things that are correct for the time as triggers. And I do find that, and quite a few groups will ask me to work out trigger experiments for them for that reason, so that they can do a trigger experiment, say, with members of the public to explain how triggers work, but also sort of say, look, the only limit to it is your imagination, but do a little bit of research before you come up with one to make it applicable.
You could play Glenn Miller over there at the English Channel, because isn't that where he supposedly was shot down by friendly fire?
Supposedly. Well, that is an interesting one, isn't it? I was due to be doing a show on him last year, but the person who was going to be my guest was taken poorly, and we've had to postpone it. But that will hopefully be a future Haunted History show on Glenn Miller, because one of the air bases he's meant to have played at just before he disappeared is actually the one I mentioned in my second book. So there's the links there as well. But yes, he is meant to be. There's rumours he was either shot down by friendly fire, or the person who flew him wasn't qualified to fly at night,
right?
And messed up. There's a couple of different theories as to what happened to poor Mr. Miller. But playing Glenn Miller at a US Air Force base, any base, seems to actually, things go berserk.
How about Amelia Earhart? Have you had any interest in that story?
I have. I think her birthday's like 2 days before mine, albeit she was born obviously a different year. And again, that was one that I was looking at to do a show on. And the person who was going to be my guest is one of the curators at the Amelia Earhart Museum and I can never remember the name of the town, but in that town. So again, that is one actually I'm thinking about doing, because I'm into aviation, and Amelia Earhart was amazing.
Has there been paranormal activity in connection with that case?
Yes and no. There's things that people have tried to link in, and you're really making me pull on my memory banks now because I haven't looked into it recently. But there's a house in the same town that she's meant to have been from that there was the local doctor lived in, and there's rumours that he delivered her. But there's no proof of this. And so some people have gone into this house wanting to talk to Amelia, but I don't think there's been any hauntings so much. But I did read an account that one of her former aircraft, a female, has been seen walking around it, inspecting it. So again, I haven't actually done much verification and cross-questioning on that one yet. But it would be plausible, because knowing what pilots are like about their aircraft, yeah, I've had quite a lot of quite good stories about pilots and their aircraft that are plausible as well. Yeah.
So I did a little bit of research about your book and your writing, and secret nuclear bunkers came up.
Yes.
Yeah. So how do you research a secret nuclear bunker? I mean,
well, it's secret in sort of speech marks. The UK. I know. America has quite a lot of unofficial nuclear bunkers. People built them in the bottom of their gardens.
Right. I had one in my block, actually.
Did you really?
Corner.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Well, after the Second World War, when they started suddenly realizing that, oops, the East doesn't like us very much, they started building these underground, very large, well, they differ in size, actually. There's loads of them in the UK. And there's one that is literally just up the road from me in Essex called Kelvedon Hatch. And this was opened in, I think it's 51 or 52, around then. And it's huge. It's huge. And it would have been one of the 12, what they call regional, sort of, I suppose, regional offices around the UK where the dignitaries, if you like, would have been based to help run the country. There's another one in near a place called Kidderminster in the Midlands called Drakelow Tunnels, which I also talk about in the book because it's one of my favorite places. Are these
private or public or?
They're privately owned, but there's actually, they say there's meant to be 12 in the UK this size, and there's only, I believe, 3 that you can visit. There's a couple that are still owned by the MOD, the Ministry of Defence, and they use them for. One of them is meant to be used for storage because they're quite secure.
Toilet paper.
Yeah, probably.
Probably where all the toilet paper
Let's face it, that's more valuable than anything now.
Yeah.
And one of them I know they use for like war drills, like battle drills and everything. I know there's one underneath Dover Castle down in Kent that it's got some very elaborate locking systems on it. So I do wonder what's being stored down there. But yeah, Kelvedon Hatch nuclear bunker. It's just outside of a place called Brentwood. It's in the sort of heart of Essex. It's very innocuous when you drive up to it. In fact, if there weren't signs, and everyone laughs about this secret nuclear bunker with all the signs. Well, honestly, if the signs weren't there, you wouldn't know it existed, because you drive up to it and you've literally got. I always say it looks like one of those little American sort of wooden. Like little farm building type things, which I can imagine someone sitting on a rocking chair on the porch, rocking outside, and that's what it looks like when you drive up to it. Very innocuous, just looks like a little farmer's sort of cottage, middle of nowhere. And then you walk in this door and you're met with this sort of 120 foot or something corridor that takes you down to the blast doors. Wow. And then you're inside. And it's, people sort of say, aren't you claustrophobic because you're like hundreds of feet underground? I don't feel claustrophobic in it. It feels to me like I'm in a 1960s tower block, office block. But you lose all sense of time because there's obviously no windows. There's no light. It's all artificial light. So yeah, it wasn't decommissioned until I think it was about 1992. And then it was offered back for sale to the original farming family who'd had their land requisitioned by the Ministry of Defence back in the sort of early 1950s. And they bought it back and they opened it as a museum. And it's been like that ever since. And it's a very popular spot for paranormal investigators because you're hundreds of feet underground, so you're not going to worry about noise contamination. If you turn the lights off, no light contamination. The weirdest thing is, though, I've stayed there overnight, and I did have some weird stuff happen. But when you come out in the day, you've gone in at night, and you think you're going to come out in night because you don't know the sun's come up, and you come out to brilliant sunshine. It's very strange. It's very strange. But yeah, it's a secret nuclear bunker in sort of inverted commas. It's a fascinating place, and when you think the hundreds of people that would have been expected to be there. But the amazing story I found out about that is, well, a lot of people say, well, nobody died here, and there was never any nuclear war, so why would anyone haunt it? And in my day job, I'm a financial advisor, and in my day job, I met someone who grew up. Her whole family grew up in Kelvedon Hatch, where this bunker is, and her dad actually worked at the bunker in the 1960s. And she remembers one time he didn't come home for 3 weeks, which was quite unusual. And she said, I remember sort of saying to Mum, where is he? And she said, oh, he's got stuck at work. He's got stuck at work. As she got older, she looked into it because he would never tell them what happened, because obviously Secrecy Act and everything else. And it was at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh, sure.
And what she found out was that they shut the doors to all the big bunkers and literally switched everything on because of how close we were to nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, that to me would show why there's energy still in these places, because if you were conditioned that if anything happened, you dumped your family, you dumped your friends, they were out on their own. Your responsibility was running this station. You know, that whether it's like a Pavlov's dog type theory, you're going to ping back to it because you've been conditioned that that's what you've got to do. And my theory is that's why these places are potentially haunted, because these spirits have almost been pulled back to it, almost like a magnet, because subconsciously that's what they've been conditioned to do. But yeah, it linked in, and I remember her telling me this story, and I was sitting there going, "That's amazing," but that makes sense.
Well, it'd be a lot of emotional energy.
Yeah.
In it, yeah.
And that to me made sense, that they actually powered the bunkers up during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So, yeah, fascinating. But unfortunately, the records aren't released yet; they're still under secrecy thing, so I couldn't double check that's true. But say I heard it as a first-hand account from someone whose dad actually worked in the bunker.
Worked around it. Yeah, cool.
So yes, the secret nuclear bunker in Kelvedon Hatch in Essex. Well worth a visit. Well worth a visit.
There was one location, it's about 5 hours north of me. It's been on a few television shows, called Rolling Hills Asylum.
Yes.
You've heard of it.
I have.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've had the pleasure of investigating it twice. And, hearing the history of the location, the many different types of places that it was, originally I thought it was a lunatic asylum, and then not realizing till we heard more of the history about it was a poorhouse, it was tuberculosis hospital, it was, one of those places where pretty much you could get dumped for whatever reason.
Like if you believed in reincarnation, you probably could end up there.
Oh, you'd be a witch. You'd have been in the asylum for that, especially in the 1800s, Stephen. Yeah.
Well, like one of the main ghosts that's there is this really big guy who was, I guess, a little mentally slow, or he was very, very tall. Maybe had a bit of giantism, and supposedly his ghost is seen around there. But he lived there for a number of years. Unwed
Is he
mothers.
the one who worked as a janitor and lived in the basement? Is he that one?
I believe so.
I really liked rock music.
No, I don't know.
Not that one?
No, I don't think it was that one.
Yeah.
But you know what? It's wandering through the old places like that where it has a variety of history, because it was many different types of places at that location. And it's one of my favorite places I've ever investigated. It's been 10 years since I've been there, but the 2 times I was there, the paranormal activity was off the hook.
I'll let you in on a secret, Mark.
Yeah.
It's on my show list for this year.
Oh, good. Good, because
it's going to get the haunted histories treatment. Yeah.
Do it, because I'll send you a link to. We made a little documentary of our investigation there, and it has the owner who still owns it. Same owner. When we first went there, it was a different owner, and then this other woman bought it, and she's had it ever since. And she's the one who gave the more detailed history of the location. Yeah. But, even while walking through the building and her giving us the history tour, we had several paranormal experiences. I even caught some on video of this big mass coming around her and then flying through her while she's giving the talk. Yeah. So really interesting.
Really interesting location.
It's I've seen it on a few television shows. But, I mean, the sad thing is about things like asylums and or workhouses and stuff in the UK. So many of them have been pulled down because we haven't got the space that you guys have got. And that's one of my and the reason they pull a lot of them down is because people think they were bad places. They don't look at it, well, they were synonymous with the time. And you look at the Victorian workhouses, there's no welfare state then. That was the welfare state. And if it wasn't for these places, most of the residents there would have starved to death. So I kind of, that's one of my specialities, is the Victorian workhouse movement in the UK. And a lot of those places that are still in existence, a lot of older hospitals in the UK were workhouses, because the workhouse was the first place for the poor people to get any kind of healthcare. And when you sort of point out to people that you do realise that hospital you're going to is a former workhouse, they're absolutely horrified. But it's like, well, that's because that's where poor people got care. A lot of them went into the workhouse because that was the only place they could get any form of medical treatment for free. It was the only place. And yeah, so you get all these places that have had so many different usages. And it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating, the mix of energies that's in them. And Rolling Hills, I'd say, is one of them, isn't it?
Yes, because it was so many different things at different times. I mean, heck, even in the 80s, I think it was a shopping mall. But
that's pretty horrible.
Yeah, it was pretty horrible. They had like each room that they had different shops or something in it. They tried to make it these shops. I mean, the thing about Rolling Hills is it's literally in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
You have to drive miles to get out to it. So no wonder, as that type of a business, it wouldn't succeed. Very quiet. There's no houses across the street. There's nothing. And yet, you would hear what sounds like screams down the hallway. I'd hear children's voices talking. We got music playing in the morgue. It's just really, really strange. People were seeing shadow figures, and we got a ton of EVPs, and you know what? Sometimes you have to wonder with these locations, how much of it is part of the history of the location? How much of it is brought in later?
Yeah, it's piggybackers, hitchhikers, that kind of thing.
You have so many people going to a single location doing so many paranormal investigations. You are bound to either bring something with you or call something in that was never previously there.
Yeah, this is something this is one of the things when I can't always find an answer, a name that someone's got up. I could say it might not be anything to do with this location. It might be more to do with you, and it's followed you. And then, that is like looking for a needle in a haystack, because whenever you're researching something, as you know, you need to have some parameters to follow. Otherwise, literally, as the world is your oyster, and that takes a long time to research. So it's sometimes you do have to just say, I can't find anything. Doesn't mean that person didn't exist. I just can't find them in relation to this. Although finding usage of a place and everything, like I say, with these barracks up in St Helens, that supposedly they were a TB hospital, that's a lot easier to confirm yes or no. But if you get given a name, you can't always confirm. It could have been that there's a spirit that's attached there that had TB, and that's what some medium picked up on, and so they assumed that it must have had people with TB sort of here. You just don't know. But and then they put 2 and 2 together and come up with 5. But yeah, Rolling Hills. What state is Rolling Hills actually in, if you pardon my ignorance?
It's in upstate New York.
Oh, it is Newcastle, New York, right?
Yeah, it's a couple hours southeast of Buffalo, New York, which is right up against the Great Lakes.
Right. Well, see, you're from New Jersey, and New Jersey only has one thing for me, one thing that I associate with it.
What's that?
Bon Jovi.
Bon Jovi. What about Bruce Springsteen?
I'm more of a Bon Jovi girl.
Oh, okay. I get it. Yeah,
I was 12 when Slippery When Wet came out. That was my album, and I've stayed loyal to them.
Hey, you know what? We also had Frank Sinatra here too, so.
Well, that's going even further back.
Yeah.
When I was 12 and 13, my best friend and I were practicing saying New Jersey.
Yeah.
As much as we could. New Jersey.
New Jersey. Yeah. Going to walk the dog. I'm drinking my coffee.
New Jersey. New Jersey. Yeah, that was what we'd practice, so that if we ever got to New Jersey, we could go up to someone and say, "Hi, I'm in New Jersey." Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, I've picked up all the local colloquialisms like "use guys."
Yes. That's one of the things I love about doing all the different guests that I get. The fact I talk to people all over the world is all the different accents and places. And whereabouts are you from, Stephen?
Well, I'm born in Long Island.
Okay.
But I grew up in Miami, and now I'm up here in Portland, Maine. So I've been up and down the East Coast. Yeah.
There you go. There you go. See, to a UK person, those are so far apart. I mean, when I say I live 2 hours away from where I grew up, to an American, that's like still in the same state. Whereas for me, it's three counties away.
Miami to Portland is a pretty good stretch.
Yeah, that's a pretty good trek.
Florida is like 3 states worth in itself. It's so long.
Well, isn't it the furthest southern state, Florida? Is it the furthest southern state?
Is it? Yeah, I don't even know.
Well, yeah, because you get out to the Keys, you get out to Key West. That's the southernmost point of the U.S.
Key West is a whole different place.
Yeah, but it's still Florida.
That's a whole different culture down there. It's different.
Oh, yes.
Yes, that's what I love about doing this show, doing the podcast, and doing, especially now because everything is so global and we can speak to people globally like we're doing. You get to hear so many stories and talk to so many different people, and you also find people who are very like-minded, which you don't always expect. And and I know I still get a little sort of when I see my books sold in like Germany or Canada or America or France or whatever, and and I used to see the listener statistics from my old show, and apparently it was being played out a lot in, I say, Germany apparently, and even one of the sort of former Eastern European countries was listening to it, and I'm like, really? That's so cool. And you realise what a small world.
Well, see, what'll be fun is when your show Haunted Histories premieres. I'd be interested to see where it's being picked up. I mean, primarily our listeners are in the UK and the US, but we do pick up countries from around the world. And there was at one point when we first started, we got a hit, of all places, North Korea.
I heard about that. It still makes me laugh.
Yep. And you know what? They don't have internet in North Korea. And if they do, you know who has it. So,
well, there you go. There you go. Don't upset him or he'll shoot you.
Put a bounty on us.
No, I remember being told. I think it was actually you that told me that, Stephen. I think it was you that told me that fact when I spoke to you. And
which was that?
About the North Korea fact.
Oh no, I don't think it would have been me.
Irene might have told you.
And maybe it was Irene then. Yeah. But I do remember that. No, I've got quite a few people I know who listen to me from Australia, Canada, quite a lot in the UK, quite a few in America, it's great. I love it. It's all one big family. It's so cool.
Well, cool. That is the power of the internet, because everything, even just, 15, 20 years ago, you didn't have the internet as well as you did now. Hell, back then we still had dial-up. So it was hard to listen.
The other day. That didn't make sense to them.
It's hard to listen to these podcasts and being able to tune in and connect with people. Back in what we had over here, America Online, that was like the biggest platform. But your phone bill would go off the hook if you couldn't get
and you didn't have split lines either. I remember when I was younger, if I needed to get into the internet, or my dad was using it quite early on, the cable came out of the phone and the internet cable went in, and then you'd have almost what looked like an old reel-to-reel tape recorder plugged into the computer that the thing would play. I was at a museum I went to with the kids not so long ago, and they had things like that and had like old Ataris and all those kind of things, and my kids are like, those are so old-fashioned. Their dad and I sitting there chuckling going, no, we used to use that. It's fantastic, but it's just opened things up, and I do try and look on this as a positive thing. It's there are negatives to it, but I think the overall it's positive because you can share stuff. Hopefully, a lot of it good.
Well, one of the incredible things about the internet for me, because I've done reincarnation research, and I know a lot of old books and quite a few old newspapers are online. It's amazing. Yeah, I mean, you can do you can get to a lot of primary sources now, like archive.org and Hathi Trust and Google Books and so on.
Exactly, it's amazing. I mean, I know people sort of, you were saying about armchair researchers, and I'm probably an armchair researcher at times, because if I don't have to leave the house, especially these days with what we're going through, it's great that I can still do 80-90% of research sat at my computer and still looking, as you say, at primary sources. And I do still get rather excited when I know I'm having a trip to a records office and I'm going to look at original stuff, like old stuff. It still does excite me, because that does. But, like you say, looking at the old newspapers and it's
because it's searchable too, which is a huge thing. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but even then, sometimes you do have to trail through them and you'll be looking for, say, the execution record of someone, and it won't show it under their name. You have to sort of think quite illogically.
Think out of the box.
Yeah.
Out of the box. I had a situation where the person I was studying, my past life personality, signed with an asterisk. And you can't search with an asterisk because it's a wild card.
Yeah.
So you just have to thumb through it,
Yeah. Yeah, no, and say census records as well, especially the sort of quite badly handwritten ones where the search hasn't transposed the name correctly and all those kind of things. But yeah, I can quite easily start looking at stuff like that at 7:30 in the evening, and then at sort of midnight, the husband will come downstairs and go, "Are you actually coming to bed?" And I'm like, "Oh crumbs, I didn't realise what time was." Yeah, it's all good. It's all good. All good stuff.
It's some of the other like historical locations, and I'd be interested if you've had a chance to investigate. It's one thing to investigate, let's say, a castle or an old home, but have you ever investigated like a mine or cave or anything like that?
No. I've visited quite a few, but unfortunately, a lot of them they won't let you do investigations in this country from health and safety. We've got a cracking old mine. It's in Kent, which is just south of London, called Chislehurst, or they're called the Chislehurst Caves, but that's a kind of a bit of a misnomer because they're in the middle of a town, and they think they were a chalk mine back in the day, and it's had like a myriad of uses. And they used to actually allow people to spend the night in there. And again, this is when like weird synchronicity. And we'd been to visit this. I think we'd been down to Kent to visit some friends of mine. And coming back up, we sort of said, why don't we go and visit these caves? Because it was something that we'd wanted to do. And again, I'd had a client who, during World War II, they used them as an air raid shelter for like hundreds of families. And he'd told me about this place, and I thought next time I'm in the area, I'm going to go and visit it because it is a museum. And I sort of said to the guide, I said, do you allow paranormal investigations? He went, oh, no, health and safety won't allow us to do it because it's pitch black down there unless you put the lights on. And it's quite uneven surfaces and all this. And I was talking to my dad, and I was saying, I found this amazing place, Dad. It's called Chislehurst Caves. And he went, yeah, I spent the night there in the 60s with the Scouts. Really? And he said, yeah, it was a Halloween day. If you managed to last the night, you got given £5. Back in the 60s, that was a reasonable amount of money. And he said, none of us managed it. We all came out early because we got scared. But what had actually happened was a few years later, someone had been doing a quasi-investigation down there. It was these two guys. And they say one of them got possessed. And they had to and actually hurt himself because he ran into one of the walls whilst he was possessed. And so they banned people from spending the night down there, which is a real shame. Some of the mines and stuff, again, I would say I don't know of any that do actually allow it. I've been down a few that are museums, but I'll be honest, I'm a little bit claustrophobic, so those kind of mines and everything, the really close ones, I don't think I'd want to go down as an event because I would panic, because I get a bit claustrophobic. But I've never actually investigated one, but we have got quite a few in the UK that have had some horrendous deaths horrendous accidents. But I don't think anyone's ever actually investigated them because there's still people living nearby who have got relatives who died in them, because the mining community in the UK is a very close-knit community. Mm-hmm. And, even if it could have been their great-great-grandfather who died in it, they would get pretty aggrieved. if they found out people were doing paranormal investigations down there.
Huh. Now, see, I've had a chance to investigate both a natural cave system, and a gold mine. Both fascinating because they had a lot of history to them. Now, the gold mine was this. Both of these were back over in Colorado. I have family out there. And this one, the Phoenix Gold Mine, it's been on a couple of TV shows. Ghost Adventures did an episode there a few years ago.
I've heard of it, yeah.
And I went there a couple times, met the owner. He just passed away last year. But, going through and seeing these old mines and seeing the working conditions from the 1800s, and people have died in that gold mine. They've died, and some people, if you fall down a shaft, you stay there because they can't go and get you. And having, being able to have certain activity. But this one cave system, it's open for tours. It's like a museum. You can go and take tours during the day. They would do like a lantern type of a ghost tour. But the thing is, they confirmed that there's only one story of supposedly two young boys who wandered off in the cave were never seen again. But yet I tried looking at the historical records and couldn't find any mention of it anywhere.
Yeah.
But yet this cave, even though there's no recorded deaths there, it was mostly covered up. Native Americans knew of it, but they stayed out of it. And yet when I was investigating it, lots of activity.
Again, it could have been people exploring it to see if they can find anything to do with those two little boys.
You know what? Not a lot. No, they haven't had a lot of investigations. They've had some, but what we were experiencing. This is where where a lot of my research has changed over the years and has transformed, because a lot of the activity that I feel I'm investigating is not related to human ghosts or human spirits.
You're talking elementals here,
possibly.
Right.
Possibly everything from what the old miners used to call the Tommyknockers, or the underground. Even over there in the UK, you have the fairy lore, or the Icelandic elves, or whatever. All of these underground entities and creatures, and we had stuff down there. We got a very clear EVP voice telling us get out. didn't want us there at all.
And this was in the cave, was it, or the mine?
This was in the cave system. In fact, the caves were about a half mile deep. And I was recording strange lights in the caves. There's no insects, no bugs, no nothing. We were in pitch blackness. We got EVPs, we got the light anomalies, and just really, really fascinating stuff. Yet the history of the cave, it was found back in those days, everything was taken advantage of by entrepreneurs. They find these caves. Hey, let's open them up to the public. Let's see if we can make money off of them. And, they'll do all sorts of tricks and shticks. And one time they got a hold of a fake mummy and put it in there and said it was an Egyptian mummy that of an Indian that they found years ago, and it was fake. And, so nothing really happened there. But yet, why was there all this activity? That's something I wish I could have continued to investigate.
Mark, should we have a little disclaimer there about spelunking and that you need to have the right training and equipment? Well,
as I mentioned, this was a open attraction to the public where it was guided, and when we went in to investigate, we had special permission. We were escorted. One of the staff members was there with us. So, no, I'm not advocating going out and exploring caves or mines by yourself. Even the gold mine, one of the workers at the gold mine, who's also his own paranormal researcher, was with me the whole time. So, again,
I guess in the UK, our mines, whereas a lot of those gold mines, you didn't, the ones in the UK, the coal mines predominantly in the UK, you would have had to go in one of those lift shafts to go down to where the seam would start. The surface mines we used to have in the UK are more down in Cornwall with the tin and silver and all those kind of things. But the thing is with those, which it makes them even more dangerous, the way they used to access a lot of them was using the cliffs. They'd climb down the cliff face to go into the natural sort of almost like cave systems that then became the mines. So, I think even if I was in the bravest possible mood, that I could possibly be in, I probably wouldn't even venture to do that. So that could be why we don't get to another reason we don't get to investigate. And a lot of the mines in the UK that have shut down and have had a lot of reasons there could be paranormal activity in them, they've been filled in, so people can't climb down into them, because you are going to get people, urbexers, I suppose, urban explorers, who want to try and do that. But it's, I mean, I've seen some of the features on your sort of the American gold mines and the whole sort of gold and silver rush and everything else, and it's absolutely that was one that actually taught me where the term the mother lode came from, because I never knew where that term came from until I was researching something to do with the silver mines in sort of California, Nevada, isn't it?
Yep.
And I was researching that, and that's where I learn't where the term the mother lode came from, because I never knew. So I learn something every time I research a show. But no, I've never investigated a mine. I've been into a few caves. I've visited like the Wookiee Hole in Somerset and a few others.
Did you find Chewbacca?
No, I didn't find Chewbacca.
Okay. Sorry. I couldn't help myself. I had to go there.
Wookiee Hole is meant to have had a witch living in it who got turned to stone.
Oh,
and
okay.
There's this stones. There's this. I think it's a combination of stalagmite and stalactite that sort of dripped and formed a big witchy-looking character. The only thing about that place I didn't like was I thought I was going to turn my ankle at some point, because the surface is quite uneven. I didn't find it eerie or possible. It's an urban myth that she's a witch. But yeah, unfortunately, no Chewbacca. I'd have quite liked to bump into Chewbacca. I quite like this Star Wars, especially the early Star Wars. So yes, I did get the joke then about the Wookiees. So it's a quite famous cave system down in Somerset in the south of the UK. But I'm not a big, like I say, because I'm a bit claustrophobic. It's the sort of thing I leave my husband to go off and do, because he likes visiting sort of things like that. And I sort of sit in the coffee room and have a coffee while he's doing it. It works quite well. He gets all the photos and everything for me, and then I just look at them.
It's a lot safer.
Actually, there's one location here that I would love to investigate for a couple of reasons. It's a winery run by monks, and it's the oldest winery in the country, called Brothers Winery. It's across the border in New York State, and because it goes back so long ago, and back I think to the 1700s. So for that reason alone, I'd love to investigate it. Plus the fact, hey, it's a winery, and I'm really big into wineries right now. So
can't you just go over to Napa Valley?
Yeah. If I want to fly 3,000 miles to California,
I suppose. Yeah, but it's wine.
Yeah. Well, surprisingly, you wouldn't think so, but surprisingly here in my part of New Jersey, we actually have wineries. I didn't think you could grow wine grapes in this kind of climate, but they do.
We have them in the UK. We have wineries in the UK, similar climate, I just said, to New Jersey, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we have them over here, UK wine. There you go. And actually, the monasteries used to make things like wine, although I think it was called mead back in the day.
Yeah, that was
in sort of 13th century.
That was derived from honey, I believe.
Isn't that, that's more like beer, isn't it?
No, it's kind of it's a cross between. I've tried it. It's a cross between the two. It's that was the drink they used to make a lot of, was mead.
Very sweet.
Very sweet. It's quite nice when you get used to it, but if you're the kind of person who likes really dry wines and stuff, no, you wouldn't like it.
I'm a dry red person.
I see. I'm not. I'm the other end. But they used to make a lot of mead, but that's a whole different history to talk about monks and what they used to do.
We've spent so much time talking on haunted history, and we've got about 10 minutes left in the program. And I just wanted to give a plug to, your books. You have My Haunted History, but then you have your brand new book, A Haunted Experiment. Could you tell us a little bit about what that one's about?
Okay, well, about a year and a half ago, I was doing an article. I was on a photo shoot for a national newspaper in the UK, and there was 5 other sort of paranormal women, if you like, on the shoot with me. And funnily enough, I knew all but one of them anyway. And I was listening to them talk, and they were all talking about different types of experiments to do with the paranormal. And I started thinking about, well, everyone sort of reads stuff on how to conduct these experiments. That's quite easy to find. But where did they come from? You know, what did these people read to come up with these ideas for these experiments? And I was still finishing my haunted history at the time, but I thought, well, I'll keep an eye on this one and maybe do one on experiments. And so when I'd finished my haunted history, I started researching for what became a haunted experiment. And I decided to look at 4 different common experiments in the paranormal field. So that included trigger experiments, or Singapore theory, whatever you want to call it, or even theory of familiarization, if you want to go really posh, whatever people know it as. I also looked at EVP, electronic voice phenomena, where that came from, and Estes methods, say Carl Pfeiffer and Connor Randall's thing that they used. They sort of, even though they weren't necessarily the first to use it, they sort of copyrighted, if you like, using Spirit Box, and also something called the Philip experiment. And I basically, with all 4 of them, I looked into, as I'm a historian, I looked into the history of those experiments, where they came from, some of the pioneers of them, what they sort of basically researched to come up with their ideas. And then I decided to have a go at doing some of these experiments, almost, again, like I say, as a snapshot, doing them, not doing them over a year, because I didn't have a year to do them. And so I chose 3 different locations. And so the book talks about these 3 locations and the history of these locations. And then I try the experiments in them. And so I sort of write up some of the things I did or didn't find. I'm quite honest. If an experiment didn't produce anything, I'm telling you in that. But I'm also telling you why it might not have produced anything. And that's really where it came from, because I was just interested that everyone was sort of saying how they do this experiment and what they would use. And it's like, well, where did it come from? Who thought of it? What's the logic behind it? You know, what was the thinking? And that's where a haunted experiment came up. So it's kind of got, again, it's got history and it's got hauntings in it. But history of a theory as opposed to history of an actual event or person, I suppose, is the way of putting it.
You know, the problem with a lot of paranormal investigators now is, you know, the equipment and everything that they use is they go out and grab something they've seen on the latest paranormal television show. And most of the equipment that they use, to me, looks like absolute garbage, especially this new one that's really popular. I've seen it on a couple of shows. I forget what it's called. It's called a couple of different things, where it's similar to the SB7 Spirit Box. It scans different radio frequencies, but it's all this muted. They do a bunch of filtering or whatnot, and they sit there and go, oh, I heard this voice say that, or I heard this voice say that. All the while, I'm hearing all this talking, all this stuff going on, and yet they seem to pick and choose what they want to hear. It's like, it sounds like, okay, it seems to be picking up on regular radio signals, and, you know, you can just pick and choose what you want to hear. And it's this weird, echoey type of thing.
The Echo Box.
I guess. I don't know. I've just seen it a couple times used on shows. I'm going, okay, that's crap. The only one I'm kind of interested in, I mean, you mentioned the Ovilus is seems to be a really good tool. The SB7 Spirit Box, which I have, I've used it. I
love my PSB7. Yeah, it's one of my favorite bits of kit.
Yep, and but also the Connect system, which. I hear a lot of people try to say, well, that doesn't really map ghosts. It doesn't do that, whatever. Well, I've seen some evidence. I've seen some recordings that shows to the contrary. I think it does.
I actually had that. That was one of the pieces of equipment I used in the book. It wasn't actually mine. Without giving away too much for people who haven't read the book yet, it was an event I was at, and I was using trigger theory, and the place I was at was a former it had been used as a concert venue in the late 60s, early 70s, like a rock venue. So bands like AC/DC, Thin Lizzy, Judas Priest, Hawkwind, all those kind of bands have played there, which is like my type of music. And so I was going to use some rock music as a trigger. And I started off playing like some Thin Lizzy, and nothing really happened. So I switched to AC/DC. And I was singing
always a good choice.
A Whole Lot of Rosie. Thank you. I was singing along to Whole Lot of Rosie. I was trying to get the energy levels up by like jumping around a bit and, trying to get the energy up. And I hit the note at the beginning of Whole Lot of Rosie, which I've sung it before in bands, I know. And one of the guests goes, "Wow, that deserves a round of applause." And we had 8, I think it was 7 or 8 K2s set up along this ledge. And one by one, each shot to red when she said that deserves a round of applause. Each one. It was like a light show. And that was a bit weird. And at the same time, we saw someone walk. It's a bowling alley, this place now. And we saw someone walk along a shadow, go like if someone walking along the bowling alley. And this is where the stage would have been in its day. And that was weird enough. But somebody was sitting at a chair. And suddenly I get, "Penny, come here, come here, come here." And she had, as one of my friends calls it, the Stickman thingy camera set up. And there's 2 very easily discernible stick figures. And one of them, I'm looking at it, and there's nothing they're mapping in for this. There was nothing there it could have mapped in. One of them, I kid you not, is playing air guitar, and the other one is headbanging. And I've shown the video of this to people without telling them what's going on, and they've said, without knowing the background, one of those is headbanging and one of them's playing air guitar. That's weird. At a rock venue, well, there's rock music playing. And the camera wasn't moving. It was sat on the table. It wasn't like someone was holding it and moving it around, which can cause sort of miscalculations and evidence to be corrupted. It was sat on a table, not being moved, and these 2 figures kept coming in. And I'm not joking. And I sat and watched it. One was headbanging and one was playing air guitar. And it was strange. And like I say, I've shown it to people who didn't know the background to what I was doing that night, who didn't know where I was. They didn't know I was playing rock music. They didn't know that's what this place had been. And that's what they said. One's playing air guitar and one's headbanging. So, wow. Yeah, I think a lot of this equipment, as long as you take it for what it is, it's useful. But you can't have a blind belief in it.
Right. I mean, there's some over here in the States. There's a couple of inventors who I respect what they do because they're engineers and they really think outside the box. Gary Galko being one, he invented the Melmeter because based off of his daughter Mel who died, and Bill Chappell. And I look at some of the equipment and I go, yeah, that might be just a little too much, or impractical. And some of it, I think, is very useful in what we do.
But then think of Thomas Edison. Some of the stuff he was coming up with back in his day, people were looking at going, you for real? That's not going to work. But you look at some of the stuff that we use of his now, that is natural, so inventors do that. And like you say, some of the ideas people like Gary Galka and Bill Chappell and some of the others, lesser known ones who come up, we've got a chap in the UK who runs a firm. He's coming up with new things all the time. I find it fascinating because you've got to keep pushing it. You've got to keep just pushing and pushing. And some of this stuff, no, it's never going to really work. But some of it, you never know what's going to come out of it. And there's nothing wrong with experimenting.
Nope. Well, you know what? We have actually come towards the end of the show here. So let's plug your books one last time. So our guest tonight is Penny Griffiths-Morgan, and her books are My Haunted
History, yep. And A Haunted Experiment, available on Amazon all over the world. You can download them onto Kindle, and you can buy hard copies as well. I also have a Facebook page called Haunted Histories that you can follow what I'm doing, and I'll also be listing all the podcasts I will be doing for Paranormal UK Radio, starting on Monday with A Lemp Mansion with Gina, Emily and Ryan, also known as Three Girls in the Dark, from St. Louis in Missouri. I also have a website, again, hauntedhistories.co.uk, where I put up all my blogs. At the moment, I am trying to do 2 blogs a week for people to give them something to read while we're all locked down. And I also share them to my Facebook page as well. What else? I think that's it at the moment.
All right, well,
it.
Penny,
Go ahead, Steven.
I said that's plenty.
I still have spare time. I'll find something else to do. I'm still homeschooling the kids, so there you go.
You are. Well, Penny, again, thank you very much for coming on the show, and we're very excited that you are joining the network, and we can't wait to hear the first episode of Haunted Histories, which will be premiering next Monday here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network.
Can't wait. All
right. Well, thank you. Thanks again, Stephen, for sitting in. And Irene, we certainly hope you're feeling better soon and will be back with us. Get well and stay quarantined. And the rest of you, don't go out unless you have to go get something from the store. Stay home. Don't get the rest of us sick. We want to get this over with before summer. So anyway, thank you again, everyone, for tuning in to another edition of the Paranormal UK Radio Show. You can catch us every week here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and we also rebroadcast Monday nights on Art Bell's Dark Matter Digital Network. So everyone have a great week. Stay safe, stay well, and we will catch you soon. Have a good one.